The deal with the emotions is they want to be helpful to us. When we aren't touching base with them, they don't know how to be helpful.
Welcome to This Whole Life, a podcast for all of us seeking sanity and sanctity, and a place to find joy and meaning through the integration of faith and mental health. I'm Pat Millay, a Catholic speaker, musician, and leader, and I'm here with my bride, Kenna, a licensed marriage and family therapist. This is the stuff she and I talk about all the time, doing dishes, in the car, on a date. We're excited to bring you this podcast for educational purposes. It's not therapy or a substitute for mental health care. So come on in, have a seat at our dining room table, and join the conversation with us. We are so glad you're here. Welcome back, friends, to This Whole Life. It is good to be with you today, beloved listener, all of our listeners out there around the world. And it's great to be with you today, my beautiful bride. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm excited to be, it feels like a long time since it's just been you and I on an episode. Although I guess I don't know what order these are airing in, but in terms of recording, it's been a while since it's just been you and I up here in our recording studio. So it's good. And I'm excited that we're changing up the format a little bit tonight. I'm curious to see how this is going to go. Recording this episode on emotions and feelings, which is like, of course, one of my favorite things to talk about. But yeah, that's an occupational hazard as a therapist. But
is it a weird perspective for you that you are not so much a part of like the post-production process? So like definitely the episodes themselves, like what ends up being the episode is always news to you, but even like the order of the episodes, like when they come out, is it weird, like just being a listener kind of after we record?
It is kind of a strange phenomenon of this, Pat, that I really just get to show up and record with you, and you carry the lion's share of the production and all the admin stuff that goes into This Whole Life. But it's kind of fun because I do listen, and I get, I think, sometimes the experience of a listener, and I'm often taken by surprise at things, how they come together. It's a different process to listen than to be like having the conversation.
Do you like this podcast when you listen to it? If it's that new to you?
I do. I thoroughly enjoy.
Have you reviewed the podcast or shared it with a friend?
I don't know. I definitely share with a friend. I don't know that I've reviewed. That felt kind of weird. I think maybe one time I thought about it and I was like, no.
It is probably a little backwards. You're not that much of a listener to review. It'd be a little self-effacing if you did. That'd be okay. Self-aggrandizing?
Self-aggrandizing.
That's a better word. Yeah.
Definitely.
Self-effacing is a negative thing. That's like self-criticism. Okay, never mind. All right.
Kind of like diminishing myself.
Just your daily vocab lesson here on This Whole Life.
Welcome.
Well, as Kenna said, we are, believe it or not, dipping our toe into the pool of emotions and feelings today. So if those words terrify you, like they sometimes terrify me, I want to encourage you to not skip ahead.
Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath.
Probably in through the nose.
Typical therapist telling you to take a deep breath.
Out through the mouth.
I don't care how you breathe. I'm just telling you to stick around. It's going to be totally worth it. And I, as a recovering emotionophobic, can tell you that it's going to be worth it and it's going to be great.
Mainly because you're in the driver's seat and you've taken on the task of setting the course for this episode.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, now I can say whatever I want. Yeah, exactly. It's great. Well, as always, we're going to kick off our episode with our highs and hards. Ladies first, why don't you start us off, my love?
Yeah. So I'm going to go with my hard first, which is just that it is winter and we are coming on, I don't know, like our second or third round of intense illness in our family. We've got kids in preschool and kids in school. And so who knows where these germs are coming from.
Yeah.
But it just seems like we are a revolving door. And I think the part of it that's hard for me is it's in these moments that I feel like we don't have much margin, that like our life needs, or we need our life to go like according to quote plan, whatever plan that is. And so I don't know, it's a very humbling moment. I think I sometimes question my life choices in these kinds of moments. The moment passes pretty quickly, but to be honest, I'm like, what have we done? Just being our own bosses and having 7 children. That's really hard right now, just to feel like we are maxed out and I don't need another influenza A case like in my house or, RSV come marching through here. I don't need that. So that's my hard for sure. I would say the high for me has probably been the little moments that I have had of quality time with you, with our kids, even with friends. I've been working in my own therapy on the idea of quality over quantity and working on resisting maybe some of the messages that I've internalized around like being, quote, good, good mom, good wife, good friend, and stepping away from like quantity is what makes me good, and really working on like being present and picking, moments of connection with our kids that are meaningful for them and also for me. And so just I've been kind of walking through my life looking for opportunities like that and want many more of them, but so far feeling good about the progress I've made. So that's definitely been, a high for me, just really life-giving, even in the midst of a season that can be just draining in other ways.
No kidding.
So, yeah. And you?
As a listener to this podcast, you know that you can go back to listen to episode 3 whenever you want.
Yes.
And you can be told why you are good. And it's not quantity or quality, actually. It's just your daughter of godness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my high is that I have lots of gifts and kind of corresponding weaknesses. One of my weaknesses is penitential seasons, typically, because I just would rather have lots of fun than do meaningful things. Like,
you were straight up made for heaven, dude.
I was.
You're like, what is this purgative earthly business?
Lots of times I don't act like that, but I certainly was. Yeah. So it's a long way of saying that I love Christmas. I love Christmas. Easter is probably my favorite, theological, liturgical holiday, but man, Christmas brings home all of the nostalgia and the beauty and the music and the love and the food and it's the best. So this whole time of year, when we are recording in Advent 2022, I love it and it's the best. And all the lights and the ornaments and everything that, if I had my way, it would be a Clark Griswold situation. But with 7 kids, I don't have my way, and that's a good thing because
we have not a light outside of our house right
now. That's correct. Not a one. Yep.
Coming into week 4 of Advent.
Our electric bill is better off because I can't handle that time-wise. So that's okay. So the high is just this time of year, and I love it. The hard is that Advent this year for us has been especially un-Adventy because it's just been so crazy busy. And I'm sure you listening out there are thinking we're all busy, bro. Figure it out. You know what I mean? And it's true. Everyone's busy. I get it. But, we're in the midst of having conversations about if we're going to move to a different home in our area to have a little more outdoor space and what that process might look like and what stuff is happening business-wise that's new and totally exciting, but it's also new in the sense that we don't really know how to do some of these things yet. So we're figuring out as we go, and just lots of demands that cut into the time for stillness and peace and reflection. So we've just started a little brief tradition that you had suggested in terms of taking just 10 minutes of literal silence at night next to each other, sitting in bed to pray and just to be quiet next to each other for a minute. And it's really lovely and beautiful. And I have not fallen asleep yet, which is really amazing.
My track record, on the other hand, not so strong.
That's okay. That's fine. So the hard part is just not feeling super Adventish, but we're on our way. We got a couple weeks left, so we'll be all right.
It's unfolding.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited to get into the episode tonight, friends. We've got, I say tonight, it's always funny to me. You could be listening at 7 a.m. right now thinking, what do you mean tonight? Whenever you're listening, I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about the beautiful importance of emotions and feelings for us as people who were made by God on purpose, for a purpose, and the things that he gave us all have a purpose, including our feelings. So even just to set the stage before we get too far down the road to talk about the purpose of feelings, how can we relate to them? How can we use our feelings well to build up our own holiness and our own wholeness? I think it's helpful for us individually to just think through our relationship to emotions. All of us were raised in different families of origin. All of us were conditioned in different ways, good or bad, in the ways that we relate to emotions, the ways that we experience them, what we understand from them, what we do with them. So considering and reflecting on questions like, how do you feel about emotions? Which kind of sounds...
It's such a meta question.
Ironic. It is pretty meta, yeah. What are your feelings about emotions, Would you consider yourself to be an emotional person, whatever that means to you, quote unquote? Something like, when you individually, personally, when you think over the events of the past week, let's say, what emotions did you experience most often just in the course of kind of day-to-day life, work, family, marriage, parenting, school, whatever? Are there certain emotions that you think you almost never feel? Are there certain feelings that just aren't common for you, or maybe there's a part of you that feels like you're not really free or allowed to have those feelings? When you think about that kind of spectrum of maybe emotional awareness, do you ever feel like you're too emotional as a person, whatever that means? Or do you feel like you just don't have enough emotions, that you're not emotional enough, you're not in tune with your emotions? I think for me, I can say that sometimes I feel like emotions just get in the way, which is a significant problem when you are married to a therapist.
Or have children, or try to interact with anybody and yourself.
Or to have a relationship with a human, right? And I think more specifically, the way I feel is that the emotions that I perceive as the bad emotions get in the way, right?
Ah, yes. Bad emotions.
Isn't that funny? Like, there are no such thing, and we'll get into this, there are no such thing as good or bad feelings, right?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I certainly came of age thinking that these emotions are good over here, so we should just have those all the time, and these emotions are really bad. No one wants to feel those things, so we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, and we don't allow ourselves to go there, right? So those emotions, the ones that I put in the bad category, quote unquote, those I feel like just get in the way. So like, when we're already late for mass and our toddler is throwing a tantrum and won't put on their gosh forsaken shoes to go to mass, I feel angry. And at times I don't know what to do with that. So maybe I respond in a way that's not helpful or healthy. Or when someone, whether it's at work or here at home, if someone points out something that I ought to have done differently or better, some way that I wasn't maybe as thoughtful or compassionate or hardworking as I should have been, or even just a simple mistake, right? Nothing malicious, just a mistake that I made. A lot of times I feel these feelings of shame and sadness and like I've let people and myself down. So those feelings of shame come in crashing pretty hard for me. So again, what do I do with that? And the trick for me has been coming to this growing awareness that anger and shame, those feelings are not a negative thing, right? That the feelings themselves are information, and what I do with them will determine a lot about my life, a lot about my emotional maturity as an adult. So you, my beloved bride, as number one, a marriage and family therapist, number two, an emotionally mature human being, what would you say what are the right ways to view emotions? What are emotions in the first place? And how do we relate to emotions as integrated human people?
Yeah. I mean, good questions, complex questions, really. So, first of all, it can be helpful to acknowledge that our emotions are involuntary responses. Involuntary reactions, they show up in us. And that's why we can say that we are not culpable for the emotions themselves, right? The emotions that we feel, that come up in us, we cannot be held responsible for those. as you've pointed out, what we do with them is a whole nother ball of wax. But so that's the first thing to say, that these are involuntary responses, reactions. Why I respond in one way to a certain stimulus and you respond differently has a lot to do with, your biology, your nervous system, your neural wiring, the environment you were nurtured in. I mean, so many things, right, that differ between us. But the same thing can cause different reactions in different people, but nevertheless, they're all automatic. One of the things that I love really working with my clients on, if they come in, kind of as you were talking about, Pat, with this sense of like, well, that's a bad feeling. I'm not allowed to feel angry. That's not okay. Is to go, well, TV time out here. Hold on. All emotions, right? And I use a feeling wheel, which we're going to make available to everyone on the website in the show notes for this episode. But I use a feeling wheel in my office, and at the core of the wheel are what we call the 6 core feelings. And different feelings wheels or emotions charts vary a bit, but basically, sad, mad, scared, peaceful, joyful, powerful. Those are the 6 core emotions. I remember we were giving a presentation somewhere recently, Pat, and there was a therapist in the room who maybe he had been retired, but he's, my senior by several decades.
Yeah.
And after the presentation, we'd used the feeling wheel, and he came to me and said, I'm so glad to see that the feeling wheel has expanded beyond what it was when I was first a therapist. And I think he said it was like sad, mad, scared, and happy. We're like the 4 core emotions. And so he's like, I'm glad to see that we've spent time recognizing that it's valuable to look at what I call the more pleasant emotions, like, joyful, peaceful, powerful. Well, heck yeah. If I could live in a land of joyful, peaceful, powerful, I'd choose that any day of the week. Mad, sad, scared is much harder to tolerate. So, back to your point of good, bad emotions in our, kind of maybe speak that way in our culture. What I work with my clients on is, can we bring down can we make it valence neutral, right? Can we just go, they just are. Emotions just are. And if I happen to be someone who feels more scared more often, maybe than the person next to me, it doesn't make me bad. It's information.
Yeah.
So that would be the second thing is, that emotions are neutral and they get to be information. Emotions are as good as the intel that we use them for. So, being able to decode what's going on inside of me is another huge piece of work that I do with my clients, because they're often experiencing, usually heightened emotion, or they're in a state of like dismissing the emotions. And so things are kind of locked down and shut down. And we've got to, the work in front of us is to help them find a way to feel like they're in the driver's seat, listening to the emotion and deciding what they want to do with that.
Right. No, I like that a lot. Yeah. And even it's funny when you, I've been around the feelings wheel for a long time with you now, right? And even still, I have to fight the urge to draw a line down the middle of it and have peaceful, joyful, powerful over here on the good side and sad, mad, scared on the bad side, right?
Yeah.
And I have to really work at acknowledging the fact that anger is an acceptable and healthy and helpful emotion, just like being powerful is, and it always helps me a little bit to think through Jesus's humanity and his experience of emotions as well. That there were times that Jesus felt sad, mad, and scared, right? So if Jesus, sinless, perfect God, Jesus, can cry at the tomb of Lazarus, then sad can't be an immediately negative thing. It can't skew negative, because he showed us what good sadness looks like, right? If Jesus is flipping over tables and, very gently screaming at the scribes and Pharisees, you don't go brood of vipers, you know what I mean? Unless you're kind of angry. Like, he showed us what good, righteous anger looks like, that anger is not an immediately automatically negative thing. Jesus, who, we'll get to this later on, who was afraid of what was coming with the crucifixion and was saying, I don't want to do this, God, but your will be done, not mine, right? Like, there's a place for fear that makes it not immediately a negative experience. So that's always helpful, at least to me, to get us to break down that wall between those different parts of the feelings wheel, to have a little bit more of an integrated sense of how they can affect our humanity.
Yeah. Well, and you bring Jesus into this conversation. So it might be a good moment now to, bring in our buddy Thomas Aquinas and to talk about how, in a pretty basic way, all of you philosophers out there, please go easy on me in my comment box here on this, because I'm gonna use maybe freshman year of high school philosophy here, but the idea that there are the animal faculties, right? So these are things that we as humans share in common with the animals, other creatures. So those being emotions and the five senses, and that they are in service to the angelic faculties. So the intellect and the will. And so when we say that we want our emotions to be information, they are a piece of what makes us human. And so they're important. And it's a problem if we're cut off from them, despite maybe what, the overwhelm of upset feelings can lead us to believe. Like, they actually are important for us to hear and to know about. And also they are to serve the intellect and the will. And so, along with that, another resource that we are planning to share in the show notes is a sheet that I was introduced to in my chaplaincy internship. I would say it was my first experience of group therapy. I didn't know that's what I was signing up for when I was training to become a hospital chaplain, but that is indeed what happened to me. But we had the feeling wheel and the feelings as messengers sheet. It's this awesome grid that helps us break down and make sense of our emotions, right? So when I'm working with clients, they are using the feeling wheel in tandem with the feelings as messengers, or FAM sheet. Those two go hand in hand, because once they can locate what's going on for themselves. So say, for example, they're coming in a session and they're like, I'm feeling irritated. I'm feeling annoyed. I'm feeling frustrated. Okay. So you're in the mad section of the pie, of this wheel. You're in that piece of the pie. All right, let's flip over and look at the feelings as messengers sheet. And we know that when mad feelings, or anything in that piece of the pie, when those feelings show up, the grid shows us that it's because there's been a violation, which admittedly is a really big word. And they kind of look at me like, eyes as big as dinner plates. And they're like, what, violate? And I'm like, okay, it means that a line was crossed, that something that you thought should happen didn't. Someone violated that, crossed it. It didn't occur. They didn't fall through on that. Or you were prevented from being able to follow through maybe on your duty. And so then the next row on the grid is, and what do I need in order to help soothe that? So for example, in the MAD, when there's been a violation, what I need is to reset limits and boundaries. So for example, if I feel like, Pat, you spoke to me in a tone that brought up anger in me, that brought up feeling irritated, frustrated with you, I'm going to notice that was a MAD feeling at its core. I'm going to be able to name, it was his tone. It was the way he spoke to me. And what I might need to do to reset the limit and the boundaries, to say to you, I really don't appreciate when you talk to me like that. Can you just be clear, objective with me about what you're asking me to do differently?
Right.
So this feelings as messengers, this is what we mean by saying emotions are super helpful, and they get turned into information for us that our intellect and will can utilize to make choices to be able to move forward.
Yeah. So the feelings wheel that we'll share, again, like you mentioned, on our show notes, you can download it and have it available. The feelings wheel is to help locate almost any feeling in the human experience and to trace it to one of these 6 core emotions, right? Yeah. So can you give an example of one of the more like peripheral emotions that might relate to a core emotion, so that we can, it helps us kind of locate those?
Sure. So, for example, sleepy is, I think, in the third tier. I don't actually have the wheel in front of me, but the third tier of the core emotion of sad.
Oh, I thought you were going to say parenthood. Okay, sorry. No, just gotcha. Sad.
Well, what are the emotions related to parenthood? It's complicated. Every color of the feeling wheel rainbow. So it's a less intense experience of sad, and so sometimes clients will say to me like, what? How does that work? And so we walk through the feelings as messengers sheet. And it's like, okay, so for example, when he was, going on and on and on, about his fantasy football team, and you were feeling disinterested, bored, sleepy, tuning out, what have you, is it possible that there was a loss? And for that client to go, well, he never talks about anything with that much, animated excitement related to me. Okay, so what's the loss? The loss is this sense of connection, or I'm like wondering if I'm that important and valuable, in his life. Okay, so I need to, when I'm feeling sad, I need the space to grieve and to let go, like that kind of permission to acknowledge that, which often, therapy is that place that people sort through those things. So that's an example of how we work through that and use these resources.
But that's a really helpful movement to identify an emotion that's maybe a little bit easier to identify. It's a little more immediate, maybe a smaller emotion like sleepy, And then step 2 would be to trace that down to this core emotion, or it relates to sadness, which may be, like you said, surprising or seem kind of weird or off kilter. And then taking that to the feelings as messengers grid, right? About working through that core emotion. What is it telling me? What is the message that my emotions are trying to give me information about, right? And it could be something as simple as that guy cut me off in traffic. That is a violation of my space in the lane, right? So I feel angry at Toyota Corolla in front of me, whatever it is. Or it could be a really deep, intense anger about marriage or about family life or my parents or my in-laws or whatever, right? There's a whole range of experiences. But I love that opportunity to really have a better tool to understand emotions for the information they are, so that they can inform even better decisions and actions and relationships in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so often we equate how we are feeling with like good, bad, fine, okay, all right,
It's like the ultimate Midwestern interaction. Like, how's it going? Good. Everything okay?
Is it just in the Midwest?
Fine.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that could be pretty globalized. And again, my clients they just roll their eyes at me and they're like, yes, I know. Okay. It's not on the wheel. It's not on the wheel. Because I'll just jokingly be like, is that on the wheel? Like, do you have your wheel in front of you?
There's no fine section on the feelings wheel.
Right.
You sure?
What color is that? It's gray. But again, it's because this is such valuable information. I mean, even if you're feeling a more pleasant feeling, right? To feel confident, or, sometimes a client will come in and say something that's in the powerful section of the pie. And I'll say, can we just pause for a moment? Because I've never heard you name something out of the powerful piece of the pie. And, we all stop and just kind of take a moment, because that's significant, in their growth, in their healing, to go, whoa, I'm not just so passive in my life anymore. I'm really like feeling empowered. So it's not just in the upset feelings or in the unpleasant to feel type feelings that this can be insightful, and really enlightening about where am I at? How am I, moving through my own life? Can I be in the driver's seat, instead of at the back of the bus?
Yeah.
Just kind of letting my emotions dictate where I go.
Yeah, I love that. Which leans into getting a little bit more practical as well, right? So like once I've identified my emotions and once I'm getting a better sense of the information that they're giving me, then to me at least, it kind of begs the question, like, so what? Who cares? Like, what? How is this going to affect my normal day-to-day life? How is it going to help me do the grocery shopping this week or something like that, right? So what's the right way to deal with emotions in day-to-day life? Or what do we do with these emotions, I guess, once we've located them, once we've gained the information that they're giving us? Like, what do we do with them then?
Yeah. I mean, that really connects back to, something we've talked about earlier on the podcast about values. Because the way that you, Pat, are going to react and respond when you notice that you feel angry related to something in parenting may be different than the way that I do. And it's this connection with our values that can really help determine the actual concrete, decisions that we're going to make. But more than that, I would say, and I realize this is maybe not quite as concrete as you were hoping for, but when we are not connected to our emotions, there's a there's a death inside of us. And that's a big word. And I know that. But time and time again, when clients come and we're talking through their experience of their emotions, and there's a bit of a vacuum there, or just an absence, a vacancy, let's say, they can also acknowledge, there's a depression about it. And I don't mean that in a clinical word, but depressed, right? Something is suppressed, repressed. There isn't this, the fullness of me isn't being given the space to show up.
Right.
Brene Brown, who is a fabulous, mainly known as a speaker and a writer now, but social worker, clinician, therapist, researcher. She says, and it's so true, we don't get to self-select which emotions we turn down the volume on. If I'm gonna say I don't want to feel the anger, I'm not going to feel the joy either. I'm not going to feel the peace. I'm not going to feel the powerful. I'm not going to feel the sad. And so one of the things I have to warn clients about is, okay, we're going to thaw you out. We're going to help bring life back into all of these. And it's going to feel great in some respects. And you've got to learn to tolerate maybe what you haven't felt in a long time in other respects, right? With the more unpleasant feelings. But we don't get to self-select. There's no loophole when it comes to our emotions. And so when you say like, okay, what's the point? What's the good of having them in day-to-day life? Well, I think this is living. I think this is part of the beauty of being human, is that we get to be moved by things, right? That I get to watch our kids interact in a way that's loving and gentle and kind. And my heart is just overwhelmed with excitement and pride and feeling peaceful and hopeful. Like that's an awesome thing. And also with that comes, when I see an injustice, maybe out in public in the community, and I feel anger, I feel sadness and disappointment and worry. All of that comes together in the same boat.
Yeah. The image that comes to mind when you talk about that idea of like, if someone goes to therapy and you're trying to thaw out some of these emotions so that you can bring life into all of their emotional range, not just this one particular thing, or maybe not even in therapy, but like, if someone gets into a marriage and they're maybe 2-3 years down the road and all of a sudden they're being pressed to acknowledge and deal with emotions that they haven't allowed themselves to experience for a long time, that can bring a form of pain in the midst of growth, right? It's a very Minnesota metaphor. So apologies to our friends in Texas and Florida and Colombia and wherever you find yourself.
We love you.
But
we hope we get to visit you soon.
There's this thing that happens. Yes, very soon, please. Preferably in the winter. There's this thing that happens when it's really cold outside. And if you're outside for a long time in the cold without proper clothing, you get this beautiful thing called frostbite, right? Which means that the blood starts to leave your extremities, especially your fingers and toes, to like self-protect and to go to the core vital organs that need to be protected the most, right? If you lose a pinky finger, nobody's going to lose any sleep except you, maybe. If you lose a lung, we got bigger problems, right? But the problem, though, is when you come back inside into the warmth, it hurts like the dickens because the blood is rushing back into your fingers and toes. Your body says, we're safe now. We can go back to normal. But that process of the blood warming up your fingers and going back where it's supposed to be, it hurts a lot. And we've had children who have expressed to us how much it hurts because they didn't know any better.
So sorry. So sorry, my child.
We have no significant cases of frostbite in this home, but little minor ones that once in a while. And that's the image that comes to mind of someone going to therapy or getting into a marriage and just having an awareness of these things that are all of a sudden painful. And it's a good form of pain. It's the pain that comes with new life. But it can be really difficult to face some of those feelings, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually you bring up or you hint toward something that is really difficult for myself. Again, it's something that I'm working on in my own therapy still to this day, and that is slowing it down. Like when I am experiencing especially big emotions or emotions that just overwhelm me, it may not even be that they come on, at a 10 out of 10 volume, but they're not emotions that I'm accustomed to feeling. So I'll use myself for example. I am very comfortable with being angry. That is something that I was given permission to be angry in my family growing up, and so I use that permission pretty broadly. I often feel scared. For me, my anger is usually a secondary emotion over my fear. Sad is hard for me. Sad is very difficult for me to press into. And so I notice that in order for me to, we say, metabolize when sad feelings show up for me, I've got to slow down. I have to breathe, which is like the most, cliche thing a therapist could say. But there is something that happens truly physiologically with my breath. I can moderate the intensity of what I'm going through. And when my movements slow down, my behavior, literally my body slows down, it helps my mind, my body to catch up with where my emotions may be skyrocketing off to. It lets the parts of me recollect together. And I can feel more safe even in the midst of this intense, uncomfortable feeling when I slow down. But that slowing down is difficult because we are often accustomed to these maladaptive strategies of either, nope, dismiss it, shut it down, or zoom past it, keep going, walk faster, run, for crying out loud, outpace it. And so it's very counterintuitive to slow down and to let myself feel it. And also, it's the only way that I digest it is by slowing down. So that can, I'm hoping very, very soon we're going to do an episode related to dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And there's a lot of, within DBT, it's a skill-based form of therapy. And there's a lot in there that helps provide clients with the tools to slow down, because it's not the muscle memory that we've built up. So it really takes intention and effort. Again, hello, I'm doing it in therapy. It takes intention and effort to practice that.
Well, it's really funny for me. I mean, hearing you say that, first of all, I know all that. So it's kind of fun that other people get to hear about your experience of emotions. For me, anger is not like a permissible feeling for me at all. Anger itself feels scary to me, because if I'm angry, especially at someone I love, like you or one of our kids, then I feel like I am a problem because I shouldn't be angry with people that I love. And that's not the way anger works. And I know that, but it's still a hard habit to break, But to your point about sadness, I think I have the same experience for sure in terms of like concrete examples of needing to slow down to acknowledge and to kind of deal with sadness in a healthy way. But for me, it's a little more involuntary, because when I feel big upset feelings, especially something like sadness, I tend to freeze, just like mentally, emotionally, physically, and it's not often an active choice. So sometimes I have to even try to get myself moving again because I have frozen. My brain will literally, it feels like, seize up sometimes when I'm feeling sad, and it just doesn't work the way that it normally does. I can't talk as clearly as usual. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say it. I can't even make like logical connections that I normally would in my life. It's a really funny process. And my body just feels like physically exhausted when I'm sad, like any big feeling actually will do that for me, but sadness especially. So I tend to slow down involuntarily, and I have to be aware of that. I have to acknowledge it, and I have to find the healthy ways to cope with it, to like whip up the energy to be connected to you or to the other people in our family again, and to be motivated to take the steps that I need to process whatever that grief is about, So it's a funny example to me of like, you and I have a lot of the same tangible experiences of sadness in terms of slowing down. But number one, that slowness comes from different directions and for different reasons. And number two, you and I need to respond to it in different ways for it to be healthy,
Absolutely.
which makes a lot of sense, I guess. But it's funny that the same, two different people can have the same feeling, but need to respond to it very differently.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something in couples work, especially that, and I know that's not what we're getting into here, but just that's a piece of the work, is making the space for each spouse to say, this is what happens in me when we have conflict. One who pursues and is like, it scares me to think about, not following through on this argument and seeing it to resolution before we go to bed. And the other going, I need space. Like, I need, room to think this through. And this does not feel safe for me to engage in this right now. So absolutely. We've got to make room for recognizing the people we live with, the people we're in relationship with, may have different responses to the same emotion, and that it's okay. We want to find adaptive responses and strategies when they'll show up, because they're going to show up. It's not an if, but it's a when. So when they show up, can we be okay with what we do next?
Yeah. It feels appropriate, I guess, as we start to kind of put a bow on this a little bit, to go back to Jesus, because why not, right?
He is the reason, right? He is our center. If God saw it good to give the Lord emotions, we can have heart and hope that they're meaningful for us and that they're helpful for us.
And one of my favorite examples of Jesus having feelings that all of us can be familiar with, all of us can understand what he was feeling, is the agony in the garden. That right before Jesus' death, it's this crucial, keystone moment in the life of Christ, right? And I'll read through some of Matthew's gospel here to give us a sense of how Jesus approaches his own feelings in a moment like this. So this is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, starting at verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took along Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to feel sorrow and distress. Then he said to them, "My soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and keep watch with me." He advanced a little and fell prostrate in prayer, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." So this is the Lord of the universe, the Savior of our lives, God himself, the second person of the Trinity. And verse 37, he began to feel sorrow and distress. So Jesus felt sadness and fear all in this one critical moment of his life. And he even expresses this out loud. He says this to his human friends, "My soul is sorrowful even to death." So if Jesus can give us that example of the sadness itself not being the enemy, but sin and evil being the enemy that he's about to conquer on the cross, that if he can deal with that sadness in a healthy and holy way, it shouldn't be any coincidence to us that process led to our literal salvation on the cross, right? That this is God who was human, had these emotions, and knew exactly what to do with them under the will of his Father, right? That he could feel the emotions, and then he made the perfectly holy choice, like Jesus always did, to be faithful to the will of his Father in the midst of those feelings.
Well, yeah, and he shows us perfect integration, being able to notice what's showing up and utilize it for the good of pursuing holiness. So he's not a robot where he's disconnected from, the dial is turned down to zero on his emotions. He knows that he's sad. He knows that he's afraid. And also he's not a toddler whose emotions are running him. Like we know all too well that's a thing that happens with toddlers, right? They aren't yet, their intellect and their will are not yet just taking in the information of the emotions and the senses. And so he is that perfect model of integration.
Yeah. Now, you and I, and good listener out there, we are not Jesus yet. We will never be Jesus, but we're called to be more and more like Jesus literally every day. And we're doing the best we can by the grace of God. For keep that in mind with our challenge by choice this week, right? How can you and I be more like Christ in the way that we acknowledge and understand and live through our emotions? So what would you suggest for our challenge by choice this week, babe?
Yeah. So this is, some real basic, but it's using those tools, those resources that we're making available to you in the show notes. So what I would suggest is using this daily mental health check-in during the evening, when you've had a full day and you've got a moment to catch your breath and check in with yourself, to settle into a seat with a quiet space, in a quiet space where no one will interrupt you for a good 2 whole minutes, and to take a few breaths, and then to notice what's going on inside of you. It may be in your physical body. You may already be aware of your emotions, but to notice it, and if necessary, use the wheel. Ain't no shame in that. Like, use the wheel so that you know where you're at, identify it. And if there is a sad, mad, scared feeling, or, it's subsidiary showing up, flip over, use the feelings as messengers page, and let yourself kind of better understand and empathize with that emotion that's showing up. So if you notice that there's a scared feeling showing up, walk through, okay, because there's a danger, or I perceive that there's going to be a danger. What is it that can help me receive protection and a sense of security and safety? So that process, can take a couple minutes. It can take longer if you want to, double bonus if it's paired with some journaling and you can kind of track that. But, the deal with the emotions is, they want to be helpful to us. When we aren't touching base with them, they don't know how to be helpful with us, for us, to us. And so they're like, I guess I got to up the ante and use bigger, send up the flares, send up the fireworks. I guess I've got to use bigger symptomology, right? Bigger upset feelings, bigger crying spells, bigger, feelings of wanting to lay in my bed, or rage, at the Toyota Corolla, if I'm not checking in. And so the idea is that if I can make this daily habit of noticing and attuning, I can handle chewing, digesting, absorbing the bit that I find today. If I wait, if I go weeks, if I go months, oh my gosh, if I go years, like that's like trying to eat 7 Thanksgiving dinners, right? In one sitting. It's going to be too much. So to create this habit, to institute this check-in with myself, and to let that help inform me, right, paired with my values, inform me about what I might want to do to help soothe these upset feelings, which are showing up for a reason. They're there to tell me something about myself.
I love that. Taking a chance every day to just have a little more emotional awareness, a little bit more emotional connection, intrapersonally, inside myself, first of all, so that I can have better emotional connection interpersonally with you, with our kids, with my friends, with everyone out there, just going through that process on a daily basis to build the habit of emotional information and what we do with that. I love that. It's beautiful. Yeah. Well, it's going to take the grace of God to build up any of this stuff. So do you mind praying for all of us as we wrap up here, babe?
Absolutely. Lord God, you who are divine wisdom, you who decided to create us with emotions, we surrender ourselves to you, Lord, to your knowledge, to your understanding, and ask you to help us better work with our emotions, to be able to let them tell us more about who we are created to be, what moves us, what saddens us, what excites us, what scares us, that we can receive that information with openness, trusting that your Holy Spirit is with us to help us make sense of it, to help us be able to tolerate it and manage it. So we thank you for sending your son to give us his witness and his example. It helps us to know that this is possible. that with you, it is possible. And we offer this request for your divine help to be with us in your Son's holy name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for your prayer. Thank you for your wisdom. And thank you for spending some time with me.
Thanks
here
for
tonight,
letting me talk about maybe one of my favorite concepts ever. There's going to be an episode 2, 3, 4, 7 on this, right? Like we're going to be back to, I mean, I'm just getting started. I'm just getting warmed up.
As long as you understand that I'm just getting started on the Marvel episodes too, then yes, that is totally fine.
Bargaining, I see you.
Compromise in marriage is another episode that maybe we'll do someday. Well, friends, we're so glad that you've been here with us as well. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to share this episode, this podcast with your spouse, with your friends, with your parents, with anyone out there who might benefit, which is probably everyone, to be honest. Go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. If you would rate and review, if your podcast player of choice allows you to do so, that would be great. And finally, visit us on thiswholelifepodcast.com. You can send us a note about your emotional experience. You can get as personal or as superficial as you want. And again, in the show notes, you'll find the resources that we mentioned, the feelings wheel and the feelings as messenger sheet. And finally, you can find us on social media, on Instagram at This Whole Life Podcast, on Facebook at This Whole Life Podcast as well, and on Twitter at This Whole Life. God bless you, friends. Enjoy your emotional work out there, and we'll see you next time.
You're not alone.
This Whole Life is a production of the Martin Center for Integration. Visit us online at thiswholelifepodcast.com.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Toodaloo.
Bye!
See ya.
Woo!
Children sleeping.
Woo!
Children are sleeping.